The Clinical Research Unit was established in 2020, but the genesis for the existence of the Clinical Research Unit, we call it the CRU, stems from the Chancellor's vision that he expressed in 2011 when he opened up the Heart and the Cancer Center. At that time, he said there were two things shortchanged in the developing world. One was research, the other one was education. Less than 1% of clinical trials conducted in the world are conducted in sub-Saharan Africa. We said we will change that paradigm. There was an article in the Daily Nation that said drugs developed in the West will not work in Africa. That's not quite true, but there is a truth to that, in the sense that the genetic makeup of the African patient is different than the Caucasian patient. But all the drugs we used in cancer today in Kenya have been developed in the West. So our pitch to the developed world is to say, test your drug on our patients to see whether they apply the same way as they apply to the Caucasian patients. We got certified as a clinical research unit by an independent entity in 2020. And there the CRU was waiting for business. To be able to do clinical research, you've got to give a study agent in a specific time frame, then be able to demonstrate that there is drug available in circulation in the patient during that time frame. Clinical trials are done by a staff that is trained in good clinical practice for clinical research. It is different from standard of care patient care. So we have clinical trials, for example, for aggressive breast cancer in patients who have failed prior therapy. So if you come to my clinic at AKU in Hemok, I give you chemotherapy for breast cancer. When you progress, we may have a clinical trial for you. So you come then to a clinical research unit. There's a screening process. There's your eligibility checklist. If you meet the eligibility, you get enrolled onto the clinical trial, and then you are treated here in the CRU for the duration of your study. If you respond, you will continue therapy. Therapy is free of charge to you. If you progress and the new therapy is not working for you, we send you back to your doctor. The point is that we have to study new drugs on the African patient to be sure that they are really relevant for the treatment of an African patient. If you look at our clinical research unit, our motto is a drug called hope. These are trials that are being used for patients who have failed all other therapy. And the hope is that it may work for them. If it doesn't work for them, it will work for somebody else within this particular context. Not for me, for a loved one in the future, for somebody I do not even know. Because the drug that they used today was a clinical trial that somebody else was, in a way, applying to them. And that knowledge from 10 years ago is being applied to a patient today. In the 11 clinical trials we've done, 2/3 of them are bringing a new drug, immunotherapy, immunoconjugates, monoclonal antibodies, drugs that have never been used on an African patient. We were the first ones to study them in an African population. We were able to show that they work or do not work. The toxicity, the efficacy, and all the equipment we have here is to study the kinetics, the dynamics of these drugs in the African patient. So what have we achieved? We have at least a dozen papers in the journals, high impact journals, did not exist before. 200 patients who are in a clinical trial, did not exist before. We have African patients now being studied on these particular drugs that were not being able to be studied before. And then I think a hallmark of the CRU is the first therapy where we blocked a specific gene. It was the first time that the gene of a patient determined whether they were eligible for a clinical trial, where we did a precision oncology trial, molecularly blocking a specific gene. That to me is historic. That says we exist, we are here, we mean business, and you should reckon with the fact that whatever we develop here will be new knowledge applicable to patients in Africa, and the world can realize that we at AKU provide new knowledge that otherwise today had not existed so far. And the one thing we are lacking in the CRU in East Africa is a platform where we can study the genetic makeup of a patient and the genetic makeup of their tumor. That is called next-gen sequencing. So one of our pitches today is to try to establish an NGS platform at the University Center, 11th floor, to be able to study the genetic makeup of the patient's cancer, because the treatment of cancer in the future is not treating breast cancer or colon cancer or lung cancer with chemotherapy. It's going to treat that specific gene that is causing that particular cancer. We've showed with the study with the KRAS G12C that we can actually block that particular gene in a patient whose disease is caused by that mutation. There are 3 gaps in Africa that need to be bridged in order for us to be able to be at the cutting edge of clinical investigation. We have to have trained investigators, interested clinicians who are willing to become clinical investigators. To do that, we have a clinical trial, clinical investigator training program. CITP is a program we developed here in Nairobi that we train clinicians to become clinical investigators. We don't have trained staff who know how to take care of patients on a clinical trial. So our program CITP trains staff in clinical investigation. The regulatory process in Kenya, East Africa, is a very long process that does not allow clinical trials to be expedited efficiently into the stream. We need to be improving our regulatory processes so that the West pharma will bring their trials to us in East Africa because we have an efficient regulatory process to allow such clinical trials to be conducted here in East Africa. The future of CRU is that we will be the biggest and probably the best clinical research unit in Africa. We need to expand, more staff, more investigators, more equipment, and most importantly, a next-gen sequencing platform where we can study the genetic makeup of the tumor and those mutations that are causing the disease in our patients so that we can have clinical trials that study drugs that block those specific mutations. That is my hope, whereby a few years from now, we'll have many more people besides myself and my team who are interested in clinical research.